go off at about 4 a.m. so that I can pause in meditation and welcome the day, listen to the still small voice within, and prepare myself to welcome everyone I will encounter that day. A little after 5, I will leave my house, dragging behind me, as I've done before, a cart full of unmarked ballots in multiple languages, and a roster of registered voters, and codes for the machines that count the ballots and help less able voters who need assistance. It will be my 5th or 6th outing as an election inspector. It'll be a long day, not done until about 10 in the evening, when, after counting all of the paper ballots, both used and unused, and verifying the machine count, I turn them over to a deputy sheriff. Some, of course, in our country never believe how truly safe and reliable our democratic elections are. And their skepticism, a trait we Unitarian Universalists usually value, in this case, pokes a hole in the very soul of our democracy. You know, in our polity, ministers get elected too. When I read the scene about Isabel and Jamie debating what to tell their son about where God lives, I had a flashback to the very first interview I had when I was beginning to serve as a minister 50 years ago. And a lawyer on the search committee, whose questions always seemed to be a little bit tinged with gotcha, asked me directly, "Is God, if any, within us or beyond us?" And I replied, "If anywhere, between us. I am thou." And he then laughed blessedly, gave his thumbs up, and sure enough, I became his minister with a near unanimous vote, embracing both the believers and the skeptics. Later, when I ran for the presidency of the denomination and won by the hair of my chinny chin chin, I was often called the evangelical rabbi of liberal religion, a phrase that was bestowed on me along with an honorary degree from our seminary across the bay, that led my daughter to send me a card she found at college that showed a bearded guy with glasses wearing a patched, well-traveled road, mine's back there, a prayer shawl, and where his hair had somehow been all loved off on top, a little yarmulke with the label, "The Velveteen Rabbi." And the question, "When do I get to run and play with the real rabbis?" My answer is that that happens when you retire, something I've repeatedly failed at, since ordination is for life, while retirement is just when they stop sending you a regular paycheck. So thinking on this topic, I recalled a parable by a modern rabbi, that great Jewish sage, Martin Buber. "When the modern world began," said Buber, "during the revolutions in America and France, 3 ideals were said to walk together: liberté, égalité, fraternité." That last term might be better translated in English today as kinship. That sense that we are all sisters and brothers, all children of one creative mystery. The modern tragedy being, as Buber put it, that the 3 divided. Liberty went west, here to America, and became all too often mere freedom from, no limits on seizing land from its native inhabitants or exploiting Mother Earth. Freedom also from the claims of equality or kinship with other races, while equality went east, and through further revolutions lost touch with liberty and became the soulless equality of the Gulag, or of masses all waving Mao's little red book. while kinship, that spiritual sense of our common humanity, seemed to go into hiding, kept alive chiefly among the oppressed, re-emerging into history at times like the struggle of African Americans for basic civil rights in our land, and then by women and sexual minorities and indigenous folk and immigrants demanding equal treatment. In China, unarmed students facing down tanks in Tiananmen Square, holding up images of our Statue of Liberty. In Poland, Roman Catholics joining in solidarity with others to seek civic freedom and helping to bring down the wall in Berlin and the Iron Curtain. Struggles, I might add, that are not over. In China, Uyghurs and Tibetans and citizens of Hong Kong promised democracy are still struggling against the impulse to authoritarian rule, which is strong not only there, but in many places around the world. Poland is now giving sanctuary to millions of Ukrainian refugees from Russian aggression, you know. While here in America, all too many want to reject providing asylum to those threatened by violence, even scorning the idea that black lives do matter, and seek to control the reproductive lives of women and teach only a self-congratulatory version of American history. And as for that Statue of Liberty, I can't help but remember what the German theologian Karl Barth said when he was interviewed aboard the ship that brought him into New York Harbor as a refugee from the Nazis. As a Christian, knowing that he had been rescued while Jewish refugees were being turned away, he said, "Well, I think that lady needs some demythologizing." Which brings me to the gospel passage that I chose for today. Cast out one evil spirit and 7 more come in. I actually think that my experience of our land in my lifetime has been almost the mirror opposite. We religious liberals have been trying the whole time I've been in ministry to cast out from the American soul at least 7 evil spirits I can think of: racism, sexism, classism, ageism, heterosexism, ableism, colonialism. Yet in trying to empty democracy's soul of such debilitating and discriminatory attachments, we may have only exposed the one ism that is worse than them all and at the root of each: narcissism. Best shown in the election of 2016 by the election of the narcissist in chief. No need to name him, because he loves that. But he is only a symptom, my friends. For the last 50 years, at the end of the 1970s, the me decade, as some called it, social critic Christopher Lasch has been proven right that late capitalism and individualistic consumerism have fast created what he called a culture of narcissism. There is now a great deal of evidence to that effect. Unitarian historian Sidney Mead once quoted G.K. Chesterton in calling America the nation with the soul of a church. Yet what has happened in my lifetime suggests that there is now a gaping hole in our collective soul. And life, as Unitarian minister A. Powell Davies put it, is just a chance to grow a soul. That is, ties of real I-thou connection that live on even after our mortal time together ends, integrating all of our life experiences, our achievements and mistakes alike. As I was reminded this past Thursday when I conducted a memorial service for a dear friend. Much of America's collective narcissism, its exceptionalism, comes from an inability to look back at our mistakes with any honesty, and to accept with serenity a past that cannot be changed, while finding the courage to change what should be changed, and the wisdom to know the difference. Religion, you know, religio in Latin, is supposed to be a way of relinking ourselves to the past while seeking forgiveness and a more hopeful future. Yet the virus of narcissism that is now pandemic in America has at least 3 nasty variants. One just distorts our history and calls for us to be a Christian nation, forgetting that at the time of the Revolution, only 1 America in 10 belonged to a church. Did you know that? Adams and Jefferson were both Unitarians. A second variant is in privileging idealists who, like Jefferson, were so naive as to believe that the solution for every American was to become like one of us, the enlightened. This reminds me of that sometime Unitarian and so-called egghead Adlai Stevenson, when he ran for president, responding to a supporter who said, "Mr. Stevenson, every thinking person in America will vote for you." To which he replied, "That won't be enough. I need a majority." But the third variant is perhaps the worst. It suggests that the purpose of religion is not to point the way toward a sane and sustainable future for us all, a beloved community in harmony with Earth. No, religion should be about what matters to me. Me, the consumer of religion. Now, it's easy to see this on the religious right, where a prosperity gospel, as if that's what Jesus preached, is by now the dominant note. Send me your money, honey, and I promise God will make you rich. It's worked for me. Yet there is a similar, seemingly secular tendency that says that all focus of spirituality should be me. Because it starts with you, learning to be your best self, just thinking yourself Godward, losing ego, which is always a tricky business, and rising in consciousness without having to give up much or connect much. Today, the fastest growing group in religious America are those who, when asked their faith, reply, none. Their mantra, I'm spiritual but not religious. And the fastest growing demographic group, similarly, people who live alone. The fastest growing public health issues, not COVID, loneliness, addiction, self-harm, a suicide rate that has more than doubled in the last 20 years. Sociologist Robert Bellah, late of Berkeley, in his book Habits of the Heart, spoke of the delusion that some entirely individualistic forms of New Age spirituality can ever substitute for authentic, justice-seeking religious communities. That's what Rabbi Wolpe was after. But today, even secularism seems to be infected with the virus of narcissism. Just look at our tech billionaires. Now, building connections. As UUA president, I worked so hard to build connections not only within and among our congregations, but also across religious lines. I remember sitting down with Francis Kisley, the founder of Catholics for Choice, and Sister Joan Chittister, the articulate leader of the Benedictine Sisters of America, as we tried to face down the pretensions of the so-called Christian coalition and the religious right. And when a male Methodist bishop expressed worry about what the conservatives in his own conference would say, Sister Joan memorably replied, "You're not going to get very much sympathy from me, you know. I'm trying to reform the Catholic Church." But it is vital that we remember that in every authentic community of faith, There are people of real integrity and thoughtfulness and conscience who want to connect. And we must never forget that, even as we UUs try to form and sustain such communities ourselves. In fact, what inspired this sermon was reading a meditation by Sister Joan, in which she pointed out that every one of us experiences both the pull toward connection and the push back into reflective individual conscience. That this is our spiritual condition. We seek a sense of connection with the universe and with others, yet unless we practice what Howard Thurman called a discipline of the spirit in an inclusive community, our sense of kinship is likely to remain both fragile and very partial. Or as Thomas Merton put it, we cannot find ourselves within ourselves. We can only find ourselves in others. While at the same time, before we can go out to others, we must first find ourselves. This is why I begin every day in meditation. I think our young people sense the hole in the soul of our culture. I was once in a glitzy shopping mall as the Christmas season began, that consumerist potlatch that once was about a vulnerable child. And everybody seemed burdened with buying, while I was meditating on how even giving gifts can become tainted with forms of sneaky competition and self-congratulation. And then I caught sight of a teenage boy who was just bopping along, unburdened, listening to his earbuds, and wearing a t-shirt emblazoned with the memorable motto, "Only you can prevent narcissism." To which I now want to say, no, actually, only you, and you, and you, and you, and I together can prevent one another from falling into that cultural, spiritual, political abyss. Because if we are entirely wrapped up in ourselves, we become very small packages. To be sure, each of us is a unique and precious individual with a conscience. We affirm that as a basic principle of our free faith. We don't ask anyone to be anything but themselves, but their best selves. Deeper, more connected, more conscientious, which can only be done in trying to form and be that beloved community that we want to see. But it is already present, my friends. Whenever and wherever we gather like this, in all of our diversity, where we reaffirm our love of life and its creativity and mystery with all of our hearts and minds and souls, and then try to help one another love our neighbors as ourselves. In all the time I have served this faith, I believe there has never been a moment in American history when our culture has more desperately needed our witness, has needed the spiritual renewal that progressive religion has to offer. But we must bear witness to it in our own lives, in our conscientious concern for one another and for all others. May we show that, not just in our words, but in our example, in respectful congregational meetings, and in going to vote. and when necessary, as Francis of Assisi put it, using words and story. So may it be.
Amen.